Well, I guess I should go ahead and finally tell my story. It's not very /k/like, to be honest. It's not in a woods. I was na funds at the time. There are no skinwalkers /goatmen /fleshgates involved as far as I know anyways. But I feel compelled to finally getting around to writing the out, just for the record and maybe so you guys can get some spooks out of it. Back when I was 17 I lived just outside of Washington, D.C. I enjoyed it well enough for the most part. DC is no funds and has a massive homeless problem but isn't a complete shithole. I was a complete autist in school with depression and shit, and I got kicked out of my nice Catholic prep school due to shit grades, instead of sending me to public school over in VA where I lived. My parents decided to send me to a non-traditional school in the city. In addition to school, I had a job at a shitty movie theater in Rockville, which is just outside DC to the northwest. Now I was 17 at the time, but had no driver's license. When I was able to get my learner's permit at 15, I procrastinated due to not wanting to go to the DMV for a whole year. When I finally did get my permit, I did my hours and my driving course and such, but fell into the same trap of not wanting to go to the DMV, so I didn't get my license until I was almost 18. So because of this, and because my parents rightfully didn't want to drive me into DC every day during rush hour only to then have to go back into Virginia to get to work, I took the metro to school and work every day. If there are any Washingtonians here, then you might understand my route. I started out on the Virginia side of the Potomac River, to the east of the city, at Virginia Square/GMU Station, which is on the Orange Line. For the purposes of this story, the Orange Line starts in Virginia and ends just outside of DC to the northeast, and the Red Line starts out northwest, where my job was, and then went down into the center of DC and up to the northeast again. My school was about a block away from the Eastern Market Metro station on the Orange Line, about 3/4 of a mile southeast from the Capitol along Pennsylvania Avenue. My job was a little ways away from the Rockville Metro station. When my shift ended at around 11:15, I had to book it to the Metro stop most days and take the Red Line down to Metro Center, which as the name suggests is in central DC, switch to the Orange Line. Then take the Orange Line to East Falls Church in Virginia, from which I would take the bus or a cab home. I'll put it all in a map I'll make and post along with this. Sorry, a whole post of this is just setup. The setup is important. So now that all that is established, I can start getting into the story. For a couple months, everything was completely unremarkable. I had ridden the metro on and off for most of my life, but never this extensively, so I was fine with the whole experience. The only part that ever felt weird to me was coming home at night. During the weekends, even at like 1 a.m. people were on the metro, but during the week, when I came home from work, it was very common for me to be the only person on the train and sometimes even the only person in an entire station, though I wasn't really spooked by it, at least for a while. I always sat up front in the train. Like the very front. I liked looking out the front of the train and watching the tracks go by. I had loved doing this as a kid, and I still did because I was a child even at 17. One night I was riding the Red Line back from Rockville to Metro Center. I was the only person in the car, probably in the train. I caught the last train before the system closed. I was looking out the front of the train like usual when I saw something weird. It looked like a white branch, like birch, or something. It was thin, almost spindly. It was pressed up against the wall when I first saw it, as the train's headlights started to hit it. I thought it must have been a length of wire or pipe. But then it moved. It was really quick. Not even like twitchy quick, it just suddenly moved out of the edge of the headlights of the train and I couldn't see it anymore. I wrote it off in my head as being overworked, as cliché as that is. After all, tending to a popcorn machine on a pretty much empty movie theater is hard work. I pretty much forgot about the incident over the course of the week due to school and such occupying my mind. And then about a week later I saw it again, in about the same place on the line. This time, it was on the opposite end of the tunnel, and I got to see a little more of the thing before it moved away. It was connected to something bigger, like a leg connected to a body, which is what I immediately conjured up in my mind. As the train's headlights hit it, it moved away with the same agility, but this time, about 10 seconds later, I saw it again, and it did the same thing. And then a few days later it happened again. This time all I saw was what looked like a foot before whatever it was scampered off into the darkness. At this point I was freaking the fuck out. I felt that terrible, deep-seated desire to know more start to grow. I started to be vigilant for the weird leg anytime I was on my way home from work. I would see it more and more often over time. Sometimes I would see a little more than the leg, sometimes I would even see two of the legs, but it would always scamper into the darkness as soon as the light from the train hit it. Sometimes I would see it a few times during one ride, sometimes not. I started trying to record whatever it was. I would take a notepad with me and record between which stops I would see it, how much of it I saw, and if I saw it repeatedly. At one point it occurred to me to ask the train operator if he saw anything, so one night after I got off at East Falls Church, I quickly asked the operator up front if he ever saw anything weird when he drove the trains at night. I tried not to be a spurg about it, but he seemed on edge when I asked him, even though he replied with a simple nod. Things continued like this for a while, and seeing the thing almost became part of my routine of getting home. I wasn't scared of it anymore, not really, since I was in a fast-moving metal missile and the thing never seemed to be hostile or anything. Things just continued to go about the same path. Until one night shit got fucking real. I was riding on the train, and I was waiting for the leg to show up. But it didn't. I had seen it every day for the past 2 weeks, but there was nothing tonight. I was thinking to myself something along the lines of being sad that the 2-week streak was coming to a close when I saw them. Two glints in the darkness. My eyes at this point had gotten so used to spotting things in the darkness due to months of spotting this thing in addition to years of playing Twitch shooters, so I saw them there. And I knew they weren't normal, but I still tried to rationalize it, even after months of spotting a leg in the metro tunnels. But then they blinked. It was unmistakable that it was a blink that had occurred. I jumped so hard I nearly pulled a muscle in my leg. I could tell that those eyes I saw were entirely black. Black and beating. Like the eyes of a rat. Suddenly my fear for the thing in the dark was renewed. I was on edge for the rest of the ride to Metro Center. Though I still felt safe inside the train, I was realizing the gravity of the situation. There was something in the dark of the tunnels of the metro, and it had taken enough of an interest in me to show up almost daily. That thought followed me to Metro Center. Ironically, I felt safer in the station than I did on the train due to the simple fact I had never seen anything weird in the stations. I got to Metro Center, got off the train, and waited for my next train. It was then I started hearing it. A soft pitter-patter, not unlike that of a rodent scurrying across a floor. I became on edge again. The noise started getting louder, and I started to shit myself more. At the point where it started actually sounding like human footsteps, I said fuck it to myself, and turned around towards the tunnel where my train had come from. I shouldn't have. It was there. Not just a leg or eyes. The thing in its entirety, and it wasn't in the tunnel anymore, it was on the platform with me. That thing is something I will never forget. It was like a person, but warped to the point where almost all traces of humanity were gone. It was thin, horribly thin, emaciated. I could see how its pallid gray flesh wrapped around its bones, not even covering the holes in some of its leg and arm bones. It was hunched over, not on all fours, but hunched over like an elderly person, with its legs crumpled down and its arms held in front of its chest like how a prairie dog holds its arms when it stands up. Its head was completely hairless, and was hung down so I couldn't make out its face. I opened my mouth to scream, but I just whimpered like a baby. I shouldn't have done that. I think I provoked it. It started to move towards me with a horrible gait. It stayed in its hunched over position, low to the ground, but its legs extended out and it took long strides forward, like crouch walking. Its legs wobbled and twitched with each step towards me. It was obvious this thing wasn't used to walking like this, that it was better suited to crawling along the walls. As it came closer, I started to smell it. It had that pungent, rancid odor of trash in the city. My eyes started to water as it got closer. Speaking of which, it was closing the gap fast. When I first turned around, there must have been about 150 feet between us, but within 5 or 6 steps it was only about half that distance away. My stupid brain finally kicked in and put me into survival mode, and I fucking booked across the platform. My stupid idea was to try and outrun it to the end of the platform, then jump across the tracks to the other platform and keep running out towards the surface. My plan got about 1/4 done when I realized it wasn't going to work, because that's when the thing stretched out. I looked over my shoulder and shit myself again. The thing was now standing on its legs, and it had its arms out. I don't know how I only managed to see as much as I did in the tunnel, but what I saw in there wasn't accurately representing the whole thing. It must have been 15 feet tall at least. Its torso was thinner than its femur. Its arms came down to its shins as it let them drag along. And then there was its face. Its face looked like that of a starving man with sallow skin tightly wrapping its cheekbones like a corset. Its eye sockets were far too big for its beady little eyes, with the top of the socket jutting out a good 2 inches beyond where the eye ended. And the mouth was a gaping hole with no jaw to be seen. This thing had reached its full height. And I had just about made my peace with death when some beautiful motherfucker honked the horn on his train that was coming in downstairs to signify to no one that no one could get on. I don't why, but that horn caused the monstrosity in front of me to reel backwards and let out the most horrible sound I've ever heard before going down on all fours and scuttling back into the tunnel. I took a cab home that night. And then pretty much every night for the rest of the year. I haven't gone on the metro there since. I've moved farther into Virginia, so I haven't been around Washington, but even if I was back there I wouldn't take the metro again if it meant losing $10 billion or whatever. I did some more research. Apparently there are urban myths of something in the tunnels down there. I also found out about a series of abandoned tunnels, just under Dupont Circle, the metro stop nearest to which I commonly saw the thing. That's pretty much it. Here's a map of where I saw the thing with stations where I was near when I saw it marked and areas to avoid marked.